Why didn't this Jacob's Ladder have the effect that everyone was hoping it would? Well, we're going to talk about that and more in my JJK 251 review. So for my anime onlys out there or anybody not caught up on the manga, we'll see you in the next one. Let's start off with a really brief recap. The chapter opens up with Aotu casting Cleave and Sukuna deducing that his 20th finger must have been eaten. It then proceeds to be Jump Kaisen as Yuji, Aotu, and Rika just start laying into Sukuna every which way that they can. We find out that Yuji does indeed have blood manipulation after he explodes blood on Sukuna's face in one of the most badass moments of the chapter. And then we get a flashback kind of going over the plan here. Yuji, after reading Yuki's book, has learned about the soul, and they think with his punches he can help kind of separate Megumi and Sukuna's soul. And once that happens, they can then use Jacob's Ladder to eradicate Sukuna with the highest chance of Megumi's survival. Yuji will use these soul punches to kind of get in there and then wake Megumi up. This is successful. As Sukuna is getting his ass beat, he decides to make a huge gamble. He drops his hollow wicker basket in order to cast his dimensional slash. This is the opening that they were waiting for and prepared for. They grab his hands so that he can't do the hand signs for the dimensional slash, and this is when Aotu casts Jacob's Ladder. So we then get a view inside of the innate domain where Yuji is confronting Megumi and is like, wake up. But Megumi has given up on life. He's not willing to play ball. So we then cut back to reality where Sukuna has wrestled free enough to cast his dimensional slash. And the chapter ends with Aotu, Yuji, Rika getting torn up by these slashes and Maki showing up in the domain, stabbing Sukuna through the back. So first of all, let's talk about this moment. The MCs had a great plan. They executed it and it was honestly successful. They were able to split the souls. Yuji was able to get in there and they had the opening for Jacob's Ladder, maximum output. So why didn't this have the effect that they thought it would? Well, first of all, Megumi didn't play game, right? He's given up on life, and honestly, if he had been like ready and willing to kind of show up in that moment, who knows what would have happened? Like maybe he could have started to wrestle control of the body back, maybe not, but in any case, that didn't go according to plan, right? And this gave Sukuna somewhat of an opening to get out that dimensional slash. But why did he even have that chance, even though Megumi didn't help? Like, shouldn't this have just eradicated him? Well, I've got a little bit of a theory on this that I haven't really seen anyone else talk about, but it would make sense, at least to me. So first of all, let's take a look at this panel, where Gojo did his impromptu hollow purple that hit everything, including himself. But he says luckily he took less damage, and he speculates it's probably because it's his own cursed energy. So first of all, I think this is part of the reason that Yuji has been able to tank as much of Sukuna's damage as he has so far. I mean, he has literally taken multiple point-blank cleaves, and of course dismantles as well, and keeps getting up. And I think it's because he's been soaked in Sukuna's cursed energy, so it's not as effective against him. I'm sure some of y'all see where I'm going with this, but I think the same thing might be true of Sukuna and Jacob's Ladder. And I think this panel might explain why. This was a crazy panel, right? It was a cliffhanger, shock value, but I don't think this was just a stylistic choice in this moment. I think there is more to be gleaned from the fact that Sukuna did this. I mean, his head is literally huge, evil, and demonic. We've never seen him do something like that since this happened or even before, right? So I think this tells us something, and I think it heavily ties in to Sukuna's character and the themes revolving around him, and perhaps even what his actual curse technique might be. But that's another video for another time, because we got to get in depth for that, and I do plan on making that video. But for this, I think he is literally eating Hannah because we know he loves to eat. He is a cannibal, and I think he gains something from when he eats people like this. Now, is it access to their curse technique? Not necessarily, but like we just learned from the Gojo panel, if someone is familiar with cursed energy, if it's their own cursed energy, it will not affect them as much. And this is right after he got hit by Jacob's Ladder and then tricked her, so she stopped, right? So he just saw how potent that curse technique was against him. This could be a defense mechanism, making sure that that type of cursed energy will not be as potent against him in the future by eating it and consuming it here. Now, that's not to say he's immune to it, just like Gojo wasn't immune to his hollow purple, but it could just explain why he was able to resist even longer than we maybe thought he would be able to. Long enough to go for that gamble of getting off the dimensional slash. just a little personal headcanon right now, as I've been thinking a lot about Sukuna and his curse technique. And again, probably a video on that coming at some point. So the next thing I want to talk about in this chapter is this moment and Akotsu's fate here. I've seen a lot of people arguing online about whether or not he's a complete goner. So let's talk about it a bit. And first things first is that this is the dimensional slash. Sukuna did the same chance that we've seen him use when he used it against Kashimo and also Higuruma. So this is the slash that ignores durability, cuts through infinity. So with that being the case, I don't know how he's not bisected here. Like, the dimensional slash wouldn't have stopped 2 inches deep into his flesh, right? Like, it would have just passed all the way through because it completely ignores everything. Unless Sukuna just targeted it to like only go that deep, but why would he do that? Now, an interesting thing to think about is the fact that this Sukuna is like running on E, right? His cursed energy output and just everything is really diminished right now. But how does that fact commingle with the dimensional slash that targets existence, right? Is it possible to still target existence but be weaker and not like penetrate as deeply? I don't know. I don't know how to reconcile that, because in my mind, it doesn't make sense. Like, it almost doesn't matter what Sukuna's cursed energy output is with the dimensional slash, in my opinion, because of how strong and like fundamentally how that attack works. So that's what I'm trying to like reconcile in my mind right now. But my gut instinct is this is the dimensional slash, and Aotu has been like cut all the way through. Now, even with that being the case, it doesn't mean he's a goner like we saw with Gojo, because I think a big factor in the Gojo moment was that he was caught completely off guard. And obviously, you know, there's somewhat of an off-guardedness here with Akotsu, but not at all on the same level of Gojo, who would have just never assumed that his infinity was about to be penetrated, right? Plus, the assumption right now is that Sukuna did a binding vow to not have to use the chants or the hand signs for his dimensional slash against Gojo. And clearly, you know, Akotsu would have seen Sukuna chanting, so he knew this was coming on some level. So even though I think he has been cut all the way through, I think he could theoretically RCT his way, not necessarily to being completely fine, but to not being bisected on the floor. And similarly with Rika and Yuji, I mean, it's just like brief little panels here, right? But it doesn't seem like Rika is getting like diced up into a waffle, right? Nor Yuji, but we just talked about Yuji, how he is maybe more resistant to the cursed energy, and I think that would apply to the dimensional slash as well. So the domain clearly seems to be breaking. I don't think that's representative of Maki breaking in, because when we saw her kind of break into Naoya's domain, like, this didn't happen. She kind of like digitized Tron style into the back, and clearly she's also behind Sukuna. So I think the domain's breaking because of what's happening to Akotsu. And I don't think he's gone yet. I don't think any of these three are gone yet. I think that this is bad, and it might cause Rika to fully awaken to like manifest and try to protect Akotsu here. But since she hasn't fully manifested in this entire fight yet, there's just no way either of them are going down before that happens, in my opinion. But all that being said, I'm not saying like it's good news for Akotsu, because I still think he's going to get eaten, especially since Sukuna now knows that presumably his finger was eaten. And I think it makes more sense to have Rika have eaten it, which would make you think that Sukuna would eat Rika, but I don't think that would have the same impact. Like, I think if Sukuna is eating somebody, it's Akotsu, but I don't think he ate the finger. A lot of like what ifs, and I'm yapping hard right now, but I think Akotsu's okay here, but like obviously super diminished, super punished, and could potentially from this point get taken out potentially by being eaten by Sukuna, especially tying that into what we were talking about earlier with Hana. Like, if eating people is literally part of his strength and part of how he empowers himself, then not only could he get a boost from his finger, but get a boost from eating, you know, the prodigy here. And speaking of Maki, I loved the narrative symmetry of this moment compared to Toji striking Gojo, which a lot of people have talked about, so I won't waste too much time on it there. But I've seen people wondering if Sukuna is cooked because of this Soul Split Katana attack, and in my opinion, no. I just put out a longer video on the Soul Split Katana, so check that out for kind of more of my thoughts there. Finally, I want to give a special shout out to Mayo and Yazin for the sponsored questions in this video. And this one we didn't get to yet, but it asks, is Megumi the one who cast the dimensional slash? And no, I don't think so. I think Megumi is still just kind of lost in his feels right now and wouldn't be able to control Sukuna's body to do that, at least not at this point. Finally, shout out to Chris and Isaiah who inspired me to make this chapter review.